Hello, Chaitanya. Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Hi, Chaitanya. Hi, Caio.
Hi, Mike.
Thank you for joining us live. So, are you an iOS developer?
Yes, I am.
For how long?
For 2 years.
2 years. So mid developer, would you say?
Maybe. Not sure.
All right.
Okay.
How can we help you?
Okay, so I have this question. I'm developing this app and it consists of multiple frameworks. Okay. And each framework has its own API calls, its own navigation, and then back navigation. So how would you design this?
So it's an app with multiple frameworks. Each framework
Yes.
represents, you mentioned, a
View.
view. Okay, like pretty much like a feature inside the application.
Yes.
Okay. And
It has a complex API call. It consists of encryption, decryption of the request and the response. Also, certain things to do with the SSL pinning. I'm not sure completely how it works, but yes.
Okay.
okay, so this is an existing app?
No.
You're starting from scratch?
Yes.
Okay. And was this a requirement you chose, the multiple frameworks, or was a requirement your client chose?
Our client chose.
Okay. So what is the goal of having multiple frameworks?
To distribute it to other developers, consuming developers then.
So each developer works in a specific feature and then compose everything in one application.
So say this is our product and we can sell it to other companies. They can include our features in their own app.
So features are usable across apps.
Yes.
This is okay. Cool.
Okay,
So also their server will also implement our features and the UI will also implement the features. So the base URL will change and the path shall remain the same pretty much.
base URL changes, but the response will be the same, like the structure of the response, like the JSON, for example.
Yes.
Okay, changes the base URL, but the response is the same. Okay.
Also to add, there is theming in the app, in the framework. So the developer can choose its own colors, its own gradients, or however
Okay.
So appearance
appearance
changes
changes. Yeah.
for app,
Yeah.
right? So base URL
Or
changes.
screen. Yeah.
Screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So the idea is to create these reusable features. They're not coupled to an application
No.
target, because then you can reuse them
Yes.
across applications. Fantastic.
Yes.
And you can navigate from one feature to the other, right? You mentioned navigation as well.
The feature itself has its own self-contained flow. So it doesn't talk to other features, but in itself it will have flows.
Each feature contains its own flow, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very interesting.
That's awesome. Yes. It's
challenge.
Yeah. It's a hard challenge as well. Yeah. It's not an easy task. But yeah, let's see how we can.
It's a great way of building apps,
For sure.
Separating features in framework. It's usually called vertical slicing. Slicing features vertically, and you represent the whole feature as frameworks, right? Right.
Okay.
Let's try to design something for this. Okay, let's think about a feature you're working on. Do you have a specific feature you are working on?
Let's say I have a ledger.
I'm
a ledger.
Okay, a ledger.
Okay. I'm adding payments to it. Say I have customers. some pay cash, some pay card. I want to track the feature, the payments. And that is one SDK in itself.
Okay, so a payments SDK.
Suppose, yeah.
Okay, and you can. So you want to have a framework that represents the feature, right?
Yeah.
A standalone. So in
Yes.
there you mentioned you have API calls, right? So you're going to have
Yes.
some kind of API. And the API will have kind of, so let's say payments API. We're going to have some kind of payment module, right?
Yeah.
What are the actions you mentioned you can do in here? You can add a
payment.
Transaction, add payment.
Yeah. Add transaction.
Okay. Transaction. And will be everything in one module, even the UI.
Even the UI.
The API, everything, because you want to deploy like one framework that the client can just bring this framework and plug and play.
Plug and play, write one line of code, and that's it.
Okay, so one line of code, which means
Maybe
you need
not
some
one,
kind
but
of as simple as possible, right? You want your
Yeah.
framework to be used. So you're gonna need some kind of facade. Because here you're gonna have a bunch of components. They probably should be internal, so your clients don't have access to the internal structure of your application. Because if you make something public, you need to think that if it's public, someone's gonna use it. And if someone's gonna use it, you cannot change it, because if you change, you're gonna break your clients.
Exactly.
So as much as you can, like, try to make everything here internal, all the logic here internal, and you provide a facade, in the front, a public facade.
Like payments start, ledger start, some sort of
something like this, which is public. Everything else, try to make it as hidden as possible from clients. Because otherwise, every time you change something, you break the clients. As long as you don't break the public facade, that will facilitate the use of this framework, you're good to go. If you don't break the public interface here, you're good to go. So for example, maybe a client wants to present this feature, right? Transition to this screen from another screen. So you need to pass here some kind of like the presenting view controller, right?
Correct.
It can be any view controller, right?
Perhaps I can even take a navigation controller.
It could be a navigation controller, but then you're forcing your clients to show it in a navigation controller, right?
Whilst the navigation controller is a view controller there, right?
It could be just
correct.
a view controller, right? Because the view controller has APIs. You can say like, what is it? Show? Yes. Show. To say show inside
I
of
understood about the presentation logic. Present perhaps I can do with the parent. But what about pushing it? How do I capture the navigation controller? So currently I have implemented a solution. I have created a IB designable view. Inside that I have taken a functions like set to parent or add to parent. The UI view will add another view controller's view to the view, add the view controller's object to the parent, and whenever it's done, it will remove itself. So now my question is, if I have to navigate to the next page, like on click, I want to show the transition of a push view controller. Should I enforce my client to use coordinator pattern as I usually do in my app? That is a no, yes.
Don't force anything to your clients.
Exactly.
If you want to make your framework easy to use, don't enforce it. So what I was trying to say here is that there is this API here in the view controller show, which hides from you the context in which you are presenting it. If you are inside a view controller and you call show another view controller here, it will push it in the stack. If it's not, it's going to present it modally, or whatever context and the context is hidden from the view controller. So you don't need to know it's in a navigation controller, right? So ideally, if you can, you should present your view in a way that is not coupled with the current context. It should be able to be presented modally. It should be able to be presented in a navigation controller as well. And it should work fine in any of these contexts. Then you don't need to force your clients to provide a navigation controller or to be in a specific context, right? Because what you could do, like if they just press you a UI view controller as the starting point for you to present your feature, you could then make this decision inside your own framework, because your framework could check, like, for example, if you really need a navigation controller, you could do something like if let navigation controller equals navigation controller. Every view controller has a reference to its navigation controller, right? So inside your framework, you can decide if it's in a navigation controller, you have a specific flow. Otherwise, you present it modally, and you can say maybe else you create your own navigation controller, and you present it modally in the context, in the current context.
Push on the, But then the question comes when, like, I want to show a tab bar below it, and navigation should contain inside the tab bar, inside one of the tabs in the tab bar, which is a present case scenario.
The tab bar belongs to the client or belongs to your framework?
The client.
You need to make this difference. Yeah.
Okay.
So then it's up to the client to pass the context, right?
Right. It's not my decision then, right?
Yes. And then it's up to, if the client is deciding, no, I want this to show in a tab bar, then it's up to your client to pass the view controller that is contained in that tab bar.
Right.
Then it's up to the client to configure it in a way that it's going to present in a tab bar. That's why I'm saying try to make your framework as agnostic as possible about the context in which it's being presented, so your clients can decide to show in a tab bar or in a navigation bar or in a split view controller or in a modal or whatever is new, or in a new screen,
Right. Or directly on the window, whatever.
A new window, exactly. If you decouple that, then you provide, unless you need to be in a very specific context, and then you tell your clients, hey, you need to pass a navigation controller. Then you set in your APIs here.
Right.
Make sense? So try to avoid coupling your clients with a specific context, if you can.
So where do I put all my code? Let's say I want to show a collection view inside one of the pages in the SDK.
So here you have an SDK, right? And you have your public entry point. And here you're going to define the API you need. This is just an example, right? That you're going to present it in a navigation controller. So they need to pass a navigation controller here, right? So you can present it. Another thing you could do is to return your navigation controller, for example. Let's say start and it gets a navigation view controller, and it's up to the clients to present it in a tab bar or push it in a navigation controller or present it modally.
Okay, no, that was not a different question. Like in the same SDK, I want to push another view. Inside that, there is a table view. Now in that table view, I'll click again. I'll show another screen. There is a collection view.
Okay.
Right. No, I understand that. I was just finishing my thoughts with the public API.
Public API.
Okay.
Right.
So here inside your framework, you can structure it in any way you want or need. Let's say you're going to have here a payments view controller. Should be internal.
Be internal, yeah.
And then you have a payments probably view, or payments, let's say cell, collection cell, right? You mentioned a collection view. And maybe this is a payments collection view controller, for example.
Yeah.
You define here your collection view controller, your collection cell. The same way you would create an application, right? You already use collection view controllers before.
Okay. Most specific question in that is, where should it exist then?
Where should what exist?
The view controllers exist.
In the framework.
No, the reference. Should I keep a reference to that in the facade, say the facade class?
Right. Yes. Okay.
Because
So
I also
who
need a
creates it?
refresh. Who
Okay.
creates the facade class? I do.
No. Who creates who creates the payments collection view controller?
I do. I
Right,
do.
but
Everything inside this, I do.
yes, I understand that. But I mean, is the question like which component is going to create this view controller? Is going to instantiate it?
Yes. The facade.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first UI view, which will be
Yes.
yeah.
So you will have a
Plugged in.
public class like payments,
View.
let's say SDK, which is the
Okay.
facade, right? Just like you
Okay.
see like frameworks like, I don't know if you use Firebase or the popular frameworks that they have something very simple, say like firebase.start, and magic happens, right?
Yeah.
But inside the framework, they have many classes that you don't have access to because they are internal, right? So the idea is that you're going to have something like this, a facade to facilitate the use of your framework by clients while hiding internal details. Thus, you can change the structure, you can refactor things, you can change without breaking the clients. So you should hide as much as possible the payments view controller, for example. So it's up to your facade to create the payments view controller internally, because the payments view controller collection view controller should be internal.
So can this SDK class be a UI view?
No,
No,
yeah, it
that's
shouldn't.
why I mentioned you should have, could probably be like a static function, like start, and they pass you the presenting VC, the UI view controller, right?
See, now I think a limitation will come in where I can only use one of the instance of a payment SDK in my app. If I'm using a static function here, like static func start present VC, I'll only be expecting to this payment SDK to be used in one of the screens in the app or in one place.
Why?
Why?
You can call this method 100 times if you want,
Yeah,
not just one, right? From anywhere in the app where they want to present the payments, they will call payments SDK dot start, and you pass the presenting VC.
Yeah.
So I have this screen. It's a tab bar. Inside the tab bar, I have a scroll view. Inside the scroll view, I want to place a UI view. Inside that UI view is my payments SDK. Okay. Now I can have that single view in another tab also. So like they can create multiple instances of that. So
That's fine. Every
So-
time you go here, for example, yep, they're telling you like, hey, present it in this view controller, whatever. I was mentioning that you can, if your SDK is responsible for presenting your view, then it's up to you to do it internally. Now, if your clients are responsible to get a view controller and put in a cell, or in whatever place they want, then you return a UI view controller here, for example, or a UI view if you want. Then it's up to them to add it to a specific context that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
But here you can create all, we're going to have a
The
bunch
whole
of
hierarchy
classes here.
Yeah.
So we're going to have like a controller, and this controller we have some dependencies like the API, payments API. Let's say you have a class payment API, also internal, because you don't want your clients making calls to the API directly. It should always be through your flow. You should have control over this process. So you create the API here, you create whatever. If you need a view model, you're going to create a view model here, like payments, view model by passing the API. You can have here, I don't know, a payments view, payments view model. Let's make it a struct to make it simpler. You get the initializer for free.
No, I understand. Okay.
Okay, so thus you can define whatever structure you want internally, because you should be able to change that, right? Then you create everything, and maybe here you return whatever they will need. Like if it's a view, you return the controller view. But if you're using a view controller, you should probably return a view controller. And if they want to present this inside a view hierarchy, they can present the view controller by using the container APIs. They can add it as a child to another view controller and present the view in that view controller's view hierarchy.
In my current solution, I was taking this away from my client. I was just letting them add a UI view. I would take control of the UI view using my class, and I would add my own view controller on the UI view. Okay, got you.
Yeah, that can also work if that's what you want, So they would give you a view and you would add it inside a view. Yeah, it depends on the context, right? When you started mentioning navigation, I thought that you would present it as a whole screen, not as a portion of another screen. If it's a portion of another screen, you could have two entry points, If you are controlling the navigation, you can have something like presenting VC here.
Okay.
And then internally here, for example, you present this view controller like add child, or presenting VC.add child controller, and then you add your view to this view hierarchy. You can also have another API, because maybe not everyone wants to add it to a view. Maybe some of them want you to take control of the navigation, But if they want, you can also provide like a presenting view. Have different entry points to it, if it makes sense.
Yes.
And here you would create the view controller and maybe get the view and add it to this presenting view.
Okay.
Problem here is that you wouldn't get the view controller lifecycle methods, right? Yeah. Because to get lifecycle methods like view did load, view appear, view did appear, it needs to be part of the view controller hierarchy.
Yeah.
Unless you use some private APIs to get the controller from the view.
Okay. Maybe I'll have to look into that.
Don't.
He's mentioning it so you don't.
Yeah.
So if I just call load view if needed, won't that call my view.load and the basic things that I need
directly?
No?
Don't never call that directly. It's against the framework's rules. You can have unexpected behavior. The framework needs to call those methods because there's a bunch of other things that happens behind the scenes. Between like a view being created, between being loaded and presented. So I don't call view did load directly.
No, not view did load. Load view if needed.
Oh yeah, you can call it if you want to load the view, or just by accessing the view like this. Every time the first time you access the view of a controller, internally it loads the view.
Yeah. Okay.
But it wouldn't call view will appear. For example.
Right. Yeah.
You would call view did load, but you would not call view will appear or did appear or disappear and did disappear. You would call view did load.
Okay.
So yeah, but the idea here is to have a public interface, which is like a facade to simplify the usage of your framework. And internally here, you can have like 10 view controllers, 20 view controllers. You can, set up your API, your models, your view models, but your clients shouldn't know about it.
You can have caching if you want, right? And you then compose everything as you wish in the facade component.
Yeah. You create all your components, compose them here in the facade, and start the flow. You may have a flow controller as well, like a flow, like a payments flow.
Right.
That handles all the navigation, from one view to the other.
It's like transaction details, this sort of thing, that this class can be responsible for that then. Going from the payments to the transaction detail, payments detail.
Yeah, that was another thing. Like, I want to separate view controllers from one another. Like, one VC shouldn't know about another VC's navigation or whatever. So for that, in my app regularly, I use coordinator pattern. I write my flows. Let's say if it's from a notification tab, let's say it's from some other login flow, it will initiate like that. Basically, I add those coordinators to another its parent coordinators array, child coordinators, right? So in here, where will that coordinator exist? Like, if I'm using that pattern, I need
I don't, right.
somewhere to, yeah. Maybe you get me.
So I know that there is this coordinator pattern where you add a coordinator to another coordinator, just like you add a view controller to another view controller.
Yes.
Right? With child like this, you can
Yes.
add a controller to be a child of a view controller. I personally don't like this pattern in the coordinator side.
Okay.
Because it's pretty much just replicating the same view controller hierarchy, but now with coordinators, and it leads to a bunch of problems like return cycles. You need to remember to remove one coordinator from the other, and then you need to have callbacks every time a coordinator is removed. It overcomplicates the whole flow of the application. But what you can do, for example, here you have a payments collection view controller, and it could have a delegate. Let's say it's a protocol. It had something like read requests card details, let's say. Then you need to present the card, add card view controller, like card view controller. Right? So when the view controller needs to add the card details, it doesn't know how to transition to this view controller directly. It just delegates a message saying, I need someone to give me card details. Right? So you're going to have a delegate here. Like this. So every time the view controller needs card details, delegates this message to someone else. Like, I'm not going to do it. I don't know what needs to happen. I don't know if another view controller needs to be shown. I don't know. I just need card details. It's up to someone else to do it. And usually, the flow object implements controller delegate. So here, he would implement the did request card details. And it's up to the flow to instantiate the card view controller. Right? And then show the card VC, for example. So the flow controls this navigation between this transition from one controller to the other, and it has context on how to make this transition, right? Because maybe this card view controller also has a delegate, which means the card was created, for example. We have another protocol here. Using delegation, you can also use closures to do exactly the same.
Yeah.
You know? So let's do with closures in this one, just to show the difference.
Yeah.
So here you can have like card on, card created, let's say. Is a closure that gets a card model. Does it make sense what we're doing here?
Yeah.
Here we have a card model. It's created after the user entered the details and they are validated, right? We have a callback, which is similar to a delegate, but instead of using a protocol, we're using just a completion closure.
Completion closure option.
So here you could say something like this: card receipt.
Okay, I have used completions, and I wanted to ask you: is it necessary to use weak self in these kind of closures, because it doesn't seem like anything asynchronous will happen, and this will get released as soon as the flow is complete?
It is asynchronous because you're not getting the card instantly. You're not saying, give me a card, and it gives it. No, it's asynchronous because the user needs to enter the details, it needs to be validated. So it's like, it's asynchronous in the point of view of
Card.
this card doesn't
Controller
exist
getting the
right now
event.
when I need it. It will be given to me in the future. Makes sense?
When the card is created, correct?
When the card is created, validated, added to the API,
Yeah.
And let's say here you get the card back, right? So now you have the card, and now the view controller can have a method here like add card that will update the UI.
Right.
Add,
Right.
let's say card, and here it updates UI with card details, for example, right? So you say that you don't want the payments view controller to depend on other view controllers, for example. So a controller doesn't depend on the other one. So what do? One way we did here, we created a delegate
Abstractor.
Right? So every time it needs to request card details, it doesn't actually instantiate the view controller, push it. No, it just say, hey, I need a card. And it has a method to saying, when you have this card, call this method.
Correct.
So the flow here will then say, hey, the payments view controller needs a card details. Now the payment flow now knows what to do. I'm going to create a card view controller. I'm going to set the card created callback. And here I'm going to say controller dot add card. So the flow is controlling that what happens when the payments controller needs a card detail and how it sends the data back to the payments view controller when the card is done, because it's coordinating here the flow of data going from the payments to the card view controller and from the card view controller to the payments. And this is this is very testable. It's very easy to test this, right?
The whole thing, all components here.
The whole thing, yeah.
Very testable.
Right, and the flow doesn't need to have parent
like a parent type.
Parent type, yes, it doesn't need it at all. It doesn't need child, doesn't need a parent, doesn't need a child.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense? Something like this. Just to control the flow. And in context, right? In the context of the payment flow, this is how you add a card. It's a separate view controller that is pushed to the controller, and when it's done, it sends the data back. And you do this when you want to decouple the payments view controller from the card view controller. Otherwise, you just do it directly here, and you just create the card view controller and present it directly, right? And use the delegate method when you want to move responsibility to someone else. And you can do exactly the same also with closures. This could have been a protocol, or this could have been a closure as well, right? It's a choice.
Yeah, it's a choice.
In abstraction, as you said, that's what you need.
I've seen build times getting increased if I use too many closures. Is that?
Yes, because sometimes it's hard to infer the types, but you can help the compiler sometimes if it's having issues. You can set some type annotations. You set the build flags to tell you where is the bottleneck, and if needed, you can add the types, for example, like to help the compiler understand the context. Set the type here. Card is a card. Returns void. You can help the compiler by giving the type information. It doesn't waste time trying to figure out what the type is. Another thing is that at runtime, closures are usually less performant than protocols as well, because the compiler can optimize much better protocols than closures.
Okay.
So maybe, but only if you're dealing with like very time-sensitive things, like you need to do something very, very quickly. But in most applications, you wouldn't notice a difference. Only if you really need to optimize something to the maximum, What I like about the delegate pattern is that you pass an instance of the object who called the method, like here, which allows you to add behavior called methods to it, right? With the closure, you don't. You only get whatever, unless you pass here as well.
Yeah.
Self. Say, I'm done. Yeah. And now you get the card VC and the card.
Yeah.
When you need an instance, you pass it. Because the delegate method is like, hey, do something and then call me back when you're done. That's why you pass an instance of self here.
Basically, we are passing a function around, right?
Yeah.
Like whenever you're done, just call this function.
That's it. It's a great way of building apps, with frameworks. Like I recommend it, even
For sure.
when you're working like in a team that is not sharing a lot of code with, I don't know, other applications, because it makes testing easier. It makes like deployment easier in the long run, maintaining. And what happens, like when you work in a project and it becomes successful, at some point your boss is going to come and say, oh, we are creating another app and we want to reuse as much as possible.
Yeah.
And if you have a bunch of frameworks in there, that's easy.
You can just compose whatever you need and dazzle them.
Right.
Awesome.
I have an architecture question. So I use MVC, right? I'm pretty quick with it, I would like to think. I started learning and doing MVVM. I found that I'm creating just the UI in the same time it takes me to create UI and API. Is it the nature of writing code that way that it takes a little longer? Or is it my inexperience?
You're probably faster with something you're familiar with. So if you're more familiar with MVC, you're probably going to go faster, but I don't think one is faster than the other. It depends probably on skill, I would say.
Yes.
Because they're so similar. They're not that different,
Code duplication, I find myself writing observers. I find myself subscribing to them. If I'm using RX, like for example, which I was trying to learn.
Yeah. So
if I use simple MVC, it's just functions. I'll call them. It'll happen.
Yeah, if you're using reactive, you need to find reactive patterns for reusability, because it's a bit different. If you're used to object-oriented programming and suddenly you're going to reactive functional programming, and you're doing exactly the same you do in object-oriented in the reactive environment, then you're not going to get the most of the framework, first of all, and you may end up with a bunch of duplication because you need to think differently when you're doing reactive programming. And if you want to learn some of those differences, we also have a iOS dev mentoring number 008 on YouTube, where we test drive some features with React Swift, and we explain a little bit the differences when you're using a reactive framework, how to think differently to take the most out of the framework, because if you're using this framework, and you should aim to get the most out of it, right? Otherwise, don't use it. If you're using it, get the most out of it. Check it out.
I will.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Caio.
Keep up the great work.
Absolutely.
I'll try. Yes.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.